I've always known I wasn't the favorite. Growing up in Millbrook, Ohio, it was impossible to miss the way Grandpa Harold's eyes lit up whenever my brother Marcus walked into the room. At family dinners, Marcus would sit at Grandpa's right hand, listening to stories about the family business while I helped Grandma Betty clear the dishes. It wasn't malicious, just the way things were in our family. The men talked business, the women handled everything else. Marcus is 3 years older than me, with the kind of confidence that comes from never doubting your place in the world. He's got Dad's broad shoulders and Grandpa's sharp green eyes, and he's always carried himself like he owned whatever room he entered. Me? I'm more like Mom. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and a tendency to fade into the background when the conversation turns to important things. The morning after Grandpa's funeral, I was sitting in my tiny apartment above the bookstore where I work, still in my black dress from the service, when Marcus called. I could hear the excitement in his voice before he even said hello. "Nick, you're not going to believe this," he said, and I could picture him pacing around his downtown Columbus office, the one with the view of the Scioto River that he's always bragging about. I just got off the phone with Peterson, Grandpa's lawyer. The will reading is next Tuesday, but he gave me a heads up about what's in it. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, my heart sinking. What did he say? Everything, Nick. The house, the business, the investments, all of it. Grandpa left it all to me. Marcus's voice was practically vibrating with excitement. I mean, I knew it was coming, but hearing it confirmed, God, Nick, we're talking about $12 million. The hardware store chain alone is worth 8 figures. I stared out my window at Main Street, where the morning sun was casting long shadows between the old brick buildings. Down below, Mrs. Chen was opening her flower shop, the same routine she'd followed for 20 years. Everything felt so normal, so unchanged, even though my world had just shifted completely. That's great, Marcus, I managed, though the words felt like sandpaper in my throat. I'm happy for you. Don't sound so glum about it, he laughed. Look, I know Grandpa and I were close, but it's not like he's leaving you with nothing. I'm sure there's something in there for you, maybe some jewelry of Grandma's or a small cash gift. Peterson wouldn't tell me the specifics about the smaller bequests. Smaller bequests. The phrase hit me like a slap. 25 years of being part of this family, and I was a smaller bequest. Besides, Marcus continued, once I take over the business, I'll make sure you're taken care of. Maybe I can find you a position at one of the stores. Something in management, you know? Better than working in that dusty bookstore for practically minimum wage. I wanted to tell him that I loved working at the bookstore, that Sarah, the owner, had become like a second mother to me, that I'd rather read stories than sell hammers and paint. But Marcus was already moving on, his mind racing ahead to his new life as a millionaire. I'm driving up to Mom and Dad's tonight to celebrate, he said. They're making that pot roast you like. You should come. I don't think I'm up for celebrating tonight, I said quietly. Come on, Nick. I know you're grieving, but Grandpa would want us to be happy about this. He worked his whole life building something to pass down to the family. This is what he wanted. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the chipped coffee mug Grandpa had given me for my high school graduation. It was plain white ceramic with "World's Best Granddaughter" printed in faded blue letters. At the time, I'd thought it was just something he'd grabbed last minute from the drugstore. Now I wondered if it meant something more, or if I was just desperate to find meaning where none existed. The next few days blurred together in a haze of condolence calls and arrangements. Marcus threw himself into planning for his new role, calling lawyers and accountants, even meeting with the store managers to introduce himself as the future owner. He bought a new suit, navy blue, expensive, and got a haircut that made him look even more like Grandpa in his prime. You know, he told me over lunch at the diner on Friday, I've been thinking about expanding the business, maybe franchising. There are markets in Indiana and Kentucky that would be perfect for Harold's hardware stores. He'd already started calling it Harold's Hardware, even though Grandpa had always just called it the store. Marcus was rebranding everything, making it his own before he'd even officially inherited it. What about the employees? I asked. Some of those people have worked for Grandpa for decades. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. They'll adapt. Business is business, Nick. Grandpa understood that. He wouldn't have built what he built if he let sentiment get in the way of progress. I thought about Tom Bradley, who'd managed the main store for 30 years, or Linda Pierce, who still sent Grandpa Christmas cards every year. Would they adapt, or would they become casualties of Marcus's vision? That weekend, I found myself driving out to Grandpa's house, the big Victorian on Elm Street that had been in our family for 4 generations. Mom had given me the key weeks ago, asking me to check on things while we waited for the will reading. The house felt different now, emptier somehow, even though all of Grandpa's things were still exactly where he'd left them. I walked through the rooms slowly, remembering Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings, The way Grandpa would sit in his leather chair by the fireplace, reading the newspaper while the rest of us chattered around him. In his study, I found stacks of papers covering his desk, business documents, bank statements, letters from lawyers and accountants. Marcus was right about one thing. Grandpa had built something impressive. But as I looked around the room, I noticed something else. Photos of our family covered every surface, but the ones of me were different from the ones of Marcus. Where Marcus's photos showed him at business events and graduations, mine were smaller, more personal. Me reading in the garden, me helping Grandma with her roses, me laughing at something only the camera had caught. In the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a folder with my name on it. Inside were newspaper clippings from when I'd won the county spelling bee in 8th grade, a copy of the short story I'd published in our high school literary magazine, and a letter I'd written him when I was 16, thanking him for helping me buy my first car. I'd forgotten about that letter, but Grandpa had kept it all these years. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. I needed to hear the will reading, needed to know exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. Maybe Marcus was right, and I'd receive some small token of Grandpa's affection. Maybe that would be enough to quiet the growing ache in my chest. But as I locked up the house and drove back to town, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way Grandpa had looked at me during his final weeks, the conversations that seemed to have deeper meaning, the folder in his desk. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. Little did I know that Tuesday would change everything, and Marcus's confident smile would soon disappear forever. The law office of Peterson, Hartwell and Associates occupied the second floor of a red brick building that had been standing on Main Street since before the Civil War. I'd walked past it hundreds of times growing up, but I'd never actually been inside. The waiting room smelled like old leather and furniture polish, with the kind of heavy quiet that made you whisper even when no one was around. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, wearing his new navy suit and carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He'd gotten another haircut since Friday, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Everything about him screamed success, from his confident stride to the way he shook hands with Mr. Peterson like they were old friends. "Nick," he said, pulling me into a quick hug that felt more like a photo opportunity than genuine affection. "You look nice." I'd chosen a simple black dress and flats, the same outfit I'd worn to job interviews and church services. Next to Marcus, I felt like a shadow. Mom and Dad arrived exactly on time, as they always did. Dad wore the same suit he'd worn to Grandpa's funeral, and Mom had chosen a dark blue dress that brought out her eyes. They looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from losing a parent and trying to hold a family together at the same time. "I still can't believe he's gone," Mom said, settling into one of the leather chairs. "This morning I picked up the phone to call him about the weather forecast, like I have every Tuesday for the past 10 years. He lived a good life," Dad replied, the same thing he'd been saying all week. 87 years, built a successful business, saw his grandchildren grow up. That's more than most people get. Mr. Peterson emerged from his office at exactly 2 o'clock, a tall man with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that probably came from delivering life-changing news to families for 3 decades. He'd been Grandpa's lawyer since before I was born, handling everything from business contracts to property disputes. "Thank you all for coming," he said, gesturing toward his office. "I know this is a difficult time, but Harold was very specific about his wishes. He wanted the will reading to be prompt and thorough. His office was exactly what I'd expected. Dark wood paneling, law books lining the walls, and a massive desk that looked like it could seat a small army. Family photos covered one corner, and I noticed a picture of Mr. Peterson and Grandpa at what looked like a fishing trip, both of them grinning and holding up bass they'd caught. "Harold was one of my oldest clients," Mr. Peterson began, settling behind his desk. "He first came to me in 1983, when he was expanding the business beyond the original store. Over the years, we worked together on numerous legal matters, and I can honestly say I never met a more thoughtful or deliberate man when it came to his affairs." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his hands folded in his lap. I could see the anticipation in his posture, the way he was trying to look appropriately somber while practically vibrating with excitement. "Harold updated his will several times over the years," Mr. Peterson continued. "The final version was executed just 6 months ago, in January. He was very clear about his intentions, and asked me to make sure everyone understood the reasoning behind his decisions. He opened a thick manila folder and pulled out several documents. I'll read through the relevant portions, but first, I want to share something Harold asked me to tell you all. He said that love and money aren't the same thing, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to prove themselves." I felt a chill run down my spine. Those words sounded exactly like something Grandpa would say, but I couldn't figure out what they meant in this context. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat and began reading. "I, Harold Edmund Thompson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. The formal language washed over me as he read through the standard legal provisions. Then he reached the part we'd all been waiting for. To my son, Robert Thompson, and his wife, Carol, I leave the sum of $50,000 each, with my gratitude for the love and support they've shown me throughout my life. Mom gasped quietly, and Dad reached over to squeeze her hand. $100,000 was more money than they'd ever had at one time. To my grandson, Marcus Thompson, I leave the family house on Elm Street, along with all its contents, and the sum of $100,000. I watched Marcus's face change from anticipation to confusion. The house was valuable, probably worth $300,000, but it was nowhere near the fortune he'd been expecting. Wait, Marcus said, his voice tight. What about the business? The stores? Mr. Peterson held up a hand. Please let me finish reading the will, and then we'll discuss any questions. He continued reading, and I felt my heart stop as he spoke my name. To my granddaughter, Nicole Thompson, I leave the entirety of my business interests, including Harold's Hardware and all associated properties, investments, and accounts, with the understanding that she will use these assets to continue the family legacy in her own way. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, the distant sound of traffic from the street below, even the whisper of the air conditioning. But no one spoke. Marcus was staring at Mr. Peterson like he'd spoken in a foreign language. There has to be a mistake, he said finally. Grandpa wouldn't. He always said the business would stay in the family. He meant it would go to me. The business is staying in the family, Mr. Peterson replied calmly. Harold was very specific about this decision. He left a letter explaining his reasoning, which I'm authorized to share with you. He pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Grandpa's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, aware that everyone was watching me. Dear Nick, I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably as shocked as everyone else in that room. I know this isn't what people expected, but I've had 87 years to think about it, and I'm certain it's right. Marcus is a good man, but he sees the business as a stepping stone to something bigger. He wants to expand, to franchise, to turn Harold's Hardware into a corporation. There's nothing wrong with that ambition, but it's not what I built the stores to become. You understand what the business really is, Nick. It's not just about selling hammers and paint. It's about being part of a community, about knowing your customers' names and their stories. It's about the kind of service you can't get from a big box store or an online retailer. I've watched you at the bookstore, how you recommend just the right book to customers, how you remember what they liked and didn't like. I've seen you help Mrs. Chen with her flower displays, even on your days off. You understand that business is really about relationships, and that's what I want to preserve. I know you're scared. I know you don't think you know anything about hardware or business, but I'm leaving you more than just the stores. I'm leaving you Tom Bradley, who's forgotten more about hardware than most people ever learn. I'm leaving you Linda Pierce, who can run numbers better than any accountant. I'm leaving you a team of people who care about what they do. The money will help you learn, but the real inheritance is the chance to build something meaningful. Don't let anyone tell you you're not ready. You're more ready than you know. I looked up to find everyone staring at me. Marcus's face had gone completely pale, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working as he processed what he'd just heard. This is insane, he said, his voice rising. Nick doesn't know anything about running a business. She works in a bookstore, for God's sake. She's never even balanced a checkbook. Marcus, Dad said quietly, but Marcus was already standing up, his hands clenched into fists. No, this is wrong. Grandpa was getting old. Maybe he wasn't thinking clearly. There has to be a way to contest this. Mr. Peterson's expression didn't change. Harold anticipated there might be questions about his mental capacity. He had a full psychological evaluation done by Dr. Sarah Williams at Ohio State just 3 months ago. The report is part of the file. He was completely competent when he made these decisions. Marcus turned to look at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Not just disappointment or anger, but genuine fear. You can't seriously be considering this, he said. Nick, you have to see how crazy this is. Sign the businesses over to me, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. You can have the house, keep the 100,000, but you can't run a chain of hardware stores. I stared down at Grandpa's letter, reading his words again. Don't let anyone tell you you're not ready. You're more ready than you know. For the first time in my life, I felt something shift inside me. Not confidence exactly, but something close to it. A spark of possibility that maybe, just maybe, Grandpa had seen something in me that I'd never seen in myself. I need time to think, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. This is a lot to process. As we filed out of the office, Marcus grabbed my arm. Nick, please, don't make a decision you'll regret. This could destroy our family. But as I walked down Main Street toward my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Grandpa's letter spread out on my nightstand like a roadmap to a destination I wasn't sure I wanted to reach. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Marcus's face, the way it had crumpled when he realized everything he'd planned for, everything he'd assumed was his, had been given to someone else. By dawn, I'd made a decision. I needed to see the stores, to understand what I'd actually inherited. The main Harold's Hardware was only 6 blocks from my apartment, but I'd never paid much attention to it beyond the familiar red and white sign that had been there since I was a kid. I arrived at 7:30, just as Tom Bradley was unlocking the front door. He was a compact man in his late 50s, with calloused hands and the kind of deep tan that came from years of loading trucks and moving inventory. I'd known him peripherally my whole life. He'd been at every family gathering, every funeral, every celebration that mattered. "Nick," he said, his voice gentle but unsurprised. "Figured you'd be by today. You heard about the will?" He nodded, holding the door open for me. "Harold told me about it last month, said I should expect you to have questions." The inside of the store was bigger than I'd remembered, with high ceilings and rows of shelves stretching back into shadows. It smelled like sawdust and metal, motor oil and fertilizer, the scent of projects and possibilities. The morning light filtered through the front windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny planets. "He told you?" I asked, following Tom down the main aisle. Not the specifics, but he said things were going to change, and that I should be ready to help whoever took over. Tom stopped at a display of garden tools, straightening a few handles that had gotten knocked askew. He also said it might not be who everyone expected. We walked through the store in relative silence, Tom pointing out different sections and explaining the basics of inventory management. The sheer volume of items was overwhelming. Thousands of different screws and bolts, paint in every color imaginable, tools I couldn't even identify, let alone use. "How do you keep track of it all?" I asked, staring at a wall of electrical components that looked like they belonged in a spaceship. "You don't, not at first," Tom said with a small smile. "But you learn what people need, what they ask for most. After 30 years, you develop instincts. Mrs. Patterson comes in every spring for the same shade of blue paint for her shutters. Joe Martinez always needs 3/4-inch PVC pipe for his irrigation system. You start to know your customers' patterns." We ended up in the back office, a cramped space filled with filing cabinets and a desk that looked like it hadn't been organized since the Reagan administration. Tom pulled out a folder thick with papers and spreadsheets. "These are the monthly reports for all 5 stores," he said, setting them in front of me. Harold liked to see everything. Sales figures, inventory levels, employee schedules. He said numbers tell stories if you know how to read them. I stared at the columns of figures, trying to make sense of the data. The numbers were bigger than I'd expected. Much bigger. The 5 stores combined were bringing in over $2 million annually, with profit margins that seemed healthy even to my untrained eye. "Tom," I said carefully, "do you think I can do this?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Harold thought you could, and in 30 years of working for him, I never knew him to be wrong about people. But Marcus has business experience. He's been in corporate environments, he understands finance and marketing and all the things I've never even thought about." "That's true," Tom agreed. "But Marcus also thinks success means changing everything, making it bigger and more efficient. Sometimes the best way to kill something is to improve it to death." I spent the rest of the morning visiting the other stores, meeting managers and employees who'd known Grandpa for decades. Linda Pierce, the bookkeeper for all 5 locations, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who could rattle off inventory numbers from memory. She took me through the financial records with the patience of someone who'd explained these same concepts to Grandpa years ago. "The business is solid," she told me over coffee in the break room of the downtown store. Harold was conservative with investments, kept debt low, maintained good relationships with suppliers. "It's not flashy, but it's stable." "What about growth?" I asked. "Marcus thinks we should be expanding, maybe franchising." Linda shrugged. "Could we?" "Probably. Should we?" "That's a different question. Harold used to say that growth for its own sake was like eating for its own sake. Eventually, you just get sick." By lunchtime, I was exhausted and more confused than when I'd started. The weight of responsibility felt crushing, like trying to hold up a building with my bare hands. I drove to the cemetery where Grandpa was buried, needing to think somewhere quiet. His grave was still covered with flowers from the funeral, wilted now but still colorful against the gray headstone. I sat on the grass beside him, feeling foolish for talking to a piece of granite, but needing to say the words anyway. "I don't know what you were thinking," I said aloud. "I stock books and recommend romance novels. I can't run a business empire. The wind rustled through the oak trees above me, and I could almost hear his voice in the sound. "Stop telling yourself what you can't do, Nick. Start figuring out what you can do." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "We need to talk. Meet me at Mom and Dad's at 6. I knew that tone, even in text form. Marcus was going to make his case, probably with charts and presentations and logical arguments about why I should step aside. Part of me wanted to do exactly that, to hand over the keys and go back to my simple life at the bookstore. But another part of me, a part that had been growing stronger since yesterday, was curious about what would happen if I didn't. I arrived at my parents' house to find Marcus already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop open and papers spread everywhere. He'd changed out of his suit into jeans and a button-down shirt, but his posture was still rigid with tension. "Nick, thank God," he said, standing up to give me a hug that felt desperate. "I've been running numbers all day, and I think I have a solution that works for everyone." Mom and Dad were sitting quietly at the other end of the table, their faces carefully neutral. I could tell they'd been listening to Marcus's pitch for a while. "Look," Marcus said, pulling out a chair for me. "I know this whole situation is overwhelming for you. Nobody expects you to suddenly become a businesswoman overnight, but I've put together a proposal that could work." He flipped his laptop around to show me a spreadsheet. "You keep technical ownership of the businesses, but you hire me as CEO to actually run them. I'll handle all the day-to-day operations, the expansion plans, the financial management. You can stay involved at whatever level you're comfortable with, but you don't have to worry about the pressure of making decisions you're not qualified to make." "What about Tom and Linda and the other managers?" I asked. "They can stay, of course. I mean, there might be some restructuring as we grow, but nobody's going to get fired just for the sake of it." I studied the numbers on his screen, trying to understand the projections he'd calculated. "These growth estimates seem pretty aggressive." "That's because there's so much untapped potential," Marcus said, his excitement building. "The hardware store market is ripe for disruption. We could double our revenue in 3 years, maybe triple it in 5. We could open stores in Columbus, Cleveland, maybe even expand into other states." "What if I don't want to double our revenue?" I asked quietly. Marcus blinked at me like I'd asked why I didn't want to breathe. "What do you mean? What if I think the stores are fine the way they are? What if I want to focus on serving our existing customers better, instead of constantly chasing new ones?" "Nick," he said, his voice taking on the patient tone he used when he thought I was being naive. "That's not how business works. You either grow or you die. Standing still is just slow suicide." "Says who?" "Says everyone. Says basic economics. Says 30 years of business school case studies." Marcus was getting frustrated now, his careful composure starting to crack. "You can't just decide to opt out of capitalism because you're uncomfortable with change." "I'm not opting out of anything," I said, surprised by the edge in my own voice. "I'm questioning whether bigger is always better." Dad cleared his throat. "Maybe we should all take a step back here." "No," Marcus said, turning to face our parents. "This is exactly what I was worried about. Nick's going to let sentiment cloud her judgment, and we're all going to pay for it. The stores will stagnate, competitors will move in, and in 5 years there won't be a business left to argue about." "Or," I said, standing up, "maybe I'll figure out how to honor what Grandpa built while still moving forward. Maybe there's a middle ground between stagnation and corporate takeover." Marcus stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're really going to do this, aren't you? You're really going to try to run a business you know nothing about?" "I'm going to try to learn," I said. "That's what Grandpa wanted me to do." Grandpa was 87 years old and probably not thinking clearly about the future of his business. "Marcus," Mom said sharply, "that's enough." But the damage was done. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge, and I realized that this wasn't just about money or business anymore. This was about whether I was going to spend the rest of my life letting other people decide what I was capable of. "I'm going to give it a year," I said, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. 1 year to learn the business, to understand what I've inherited, and to figure out what I want to do with it. If I fail, if I prove that I can't handle it, then we'll talk about other options." Marcus's face went through a series of emotions: anger, disbelief, and finally something that looked like grief. "Fine," he said, closing his laptop with a snap. "But don't expect me to be there to pick up the pieces when everything falls apart." He packed up his papers and left without saying goodbye, the front door closing behind him with a finality that made my chest ache. I'd just burned a bridge I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to rebuild. Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "You know we support you, whatever you decide." "Do you think I'm making a mistake?" I asked. Dad considered the question seriously. "I think you're making a choice," he said finally, "and sometimes that's the most important thing you can do." As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just signed up for the most difficult year of my life. But for the first time since sitting in that lawyer's office, I also felt something else. a small spark of excitement about the unknown road ahead. The next 3 months passed in a blur of early mornings and late nights. I quit my job at the bookstore, much to Sarah's dismay, and threw myself into learning everything I could about running a hardware business. Tom Bradley became my unofficial mentor, patiently explaining the difference between drywall screws and wood screws, teaching me to read supplier catalogs, and showing me how to spot shoplifters without making honest customers feel unwelcome. Hardware is about trust, he told me one Tuesday morning as we unloaded a delivery of lawnmowers. People come to us when they're trying to fix something important, their roof, their plumbing, their kids' treehouse. They need to know we're going to steer them right, not just sell them the most expensive thing we have. I was getting better at reading the daily reports, understanding seasonal trends, and recognizing which products were profitable versus which ones we carried just because customers expected them. Linda Pierce had become my guide to the financial side, explaining profit margins and cash flow with the patience of someone who genuinely wanted me to succeed. Your grandfather had a saying, she told me one afternoon as we reviewed the quarterly numbers. He said that a business is like a garden. You can't just plant it and walk away, but you also can't dig it up every day to check if it's growing. Marcus and I hadn't spoken since that night at our parents' house. I'd see him occasionally at family gatherings, but he'd make polite conversation and then find excuses to leave early. Mom said he was working 16-hour days at his job in Columbus, throwing himself into his career with the kind of intensity that worried her. He's trying to prove something, she told me over coffee one Sunday. I just don't know what or to whom. Meanwhile, I was discovering that I actually enjoyed the rhythm of the business. I liked the problem-solving aspect of helping customers find exactly what they needed, the satisfaction of keeping inventory organized, the way regular customers would ask for me by name when they had complicated projects. Mrs. Patterson, the woman with the blue shutters, had become one of my favorites. She'd tell me stories about her late husband's carpentry projects while I mixed her paint. You're getting good at this, Tom observed one Thursday afternoon as I helped a young couple plan their kitchen renovation. You listen to what people actually need instead of just trying to sell them something. But running 5 stores was more complicated than I'd anticipated. The location in Westfield was struggling with competition from a new Home Depot, and the manager there, a man named Rick Santos, was pushing for aggressive price cuts that would eliminate our profit margins. The store in Millbrook Heights was doing well, but the lease was up for renewal, and the landlord wanted to double the rent. We need to make some decisions, Linda told me during one of our weekly meetings. Rick is talking about matching Home Depot's prices on everything, which would be financial suicide. And if we can't negotiate a better lease in Heights, we might need to consider closing that location. The thought of closing a store made my stomach clench. 15 people worked at the Heights location, including Jerry Williams, who'd been with the company for 12 years and had 3 kids in college. But keeping it open at the proposed rent would drain resources from the other stores. What would Grandpa have done? I asked. He would have looked at the numbers, talked to the people involved, and made the decision that was best for the business long term, Linda said, even if it hurt in the short term. I spent a week visiting each store, talking to employees and managers, trying to understand the challenges we were facing. The problems were more complex than I'd realized, not just financial, but personal. Rick Santos was a good manager, but he was scared of losing customers to the big box stores. The Heights location was profitable, but barely, and the stress of the uncertain lease was affecting employee morale. At the Westfield store, I found Rick working late one Friday night, reorganizing the tool section for the 3rd time that month. We're hemorrhaging customers, he told me, his voice tight with frustration. Every week I watch people walk in here, look at our prices, and walk right back out. They're going to Home Depot because they can get a drill for $20 less. What about service? I asked. What about expertise? You can't pay your mortgage with expertise, Rick said. These people want cheap tools, not conversations about torque specifications. I spent the weekend thinking about everything I'd learned. The business was at a crossroads, and I needed to make decisions that would affect dozens of employees and their families. For the first time, I understood the weight of leadership, not just the authority to make choices, but the responsibility to live with the consequences. Monday morning, I called a meeting with all the store managers. We gathered in the back room of the main location, 5 people who'd been doing this job longer than I'd been alive, all looking at me expectantly. I've been thinking about our challenges, I began, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. And I think we've been approaching them the wrong way. I outlined my plan. Instead of trying to compete with Home Depot on price, we'd focus on what they couldn't offer: personal service, expert advice, and community connection. We'd create a customer loyalty program that rewarded repeat business, offer free classes on basic home repair, and partner with local contractors who could recommend us to their clients. For the Heights location, I continued, we're going to negotiate with the landlord, But we're also going to explore other options. There's a vacant building on Oak Street that might work better for us, and the rent would be more reasonable. Rick looked skeptical. What about the price matching? People are still going to expect competitive pricing. We'll match prices on our core items, the things people buy regularly, I said. But we're also going to carry products that Home Depot doesn't, specialty items that contractors and serious DIY enthusiasts can't find anywhere else? Linda was nodding slowly. It's risky, but it could work. We'd be betting that there are enough customers who value service over savings. That's exactly what we're betting, I agreed. Grandpa built this business on relationships, and I think there are still people who want that. The next month was a whirlwind of implementation. We launched the loyalty program, started offering Saturday morning workshops on basic home repair, and began carrying a line of handcrafted tools made by local artisans. The response was better than I'd hoped. The workshops filled up immediately, and several contractors started sending their clients to us for specialized hardware. But the real test came when Marcus showed up at the main store on a busy Saturday morning in November. I was helping a customer choose the right screws for a deck project when I saw him walking down the main aisle, looking around like he was seeing the place for the first time. He'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 28 years. "Nick," he said when I finished with the customer, "can we talk?" We went to the back office, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "I heard about the workshops," he said, "and the loyalty program. It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I thought you'd run the business into the ground in 6 months," he said quietly. "I thought you'd realize you were in over your head and come begging for help." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. "And now? Now I'm wondering if maybe Grandpa saw something I didn't." Marcus looked around the office, his eyes settling on a photo of Grandpa with the original store employees from 1995. "I've been thinking about what he said in that letter, about understanding what the business really is." "Marcus, I was wrong," he interrupted. "I was so focused on what I thought the business should become that I never really understood what it already was. I saw customers as revenue streams and employees as overhead costs, but you see them as people." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "I'm still learning. I make mistakes every day." "But you're learning from them," Marcus said, "and you're not trying to change everything just to prove you can. You're building on what Grandpa created instead of tearing it down." We talked for another hour, really talked, in a way we hadn't since we were kids. Marcus told me about the pressure he'd felt to be the heir apparent, the way he'd built his entire identity around someday running the family business. I told him about my fears, my doubts, and the unexpected joy I'd found in solving problems alongside Tom and Linda. "I have a proposition," Marcus said finally. "What if I came to work for you? Not as CEO, not as the boss, but as someone who's willing to learn the business from the ground up. I have skills in finance and marketing that could help, but I'd be working for you, not the other way around." I stared at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I talked to my boss last week about taking a leave of absence. I told him I needed to figure out what I really wanted to do with my life." Marcus smiled, and for the first time in months it reached his eyes. "I think I want to help you build something that would make Grandpa proud." "What about your career in Columbus? Your apartment? Your whole life there?" "My whole life there was about proving I was worthy of something I'd already lost," Marcus said. "Maybe it's time to build something new instead." As we shook hands on the deal, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't known I was missing. The business was still challenging, still uncertain, but now I wouldn't be facing it alone. More importantly, I had my brother back. "So," Marcus said, grinning, "when do I start, boss?" The word sent a thrill through me, not because of the power it represented, but because of the trust. For the first time in my life, I truly believed I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 1 year later, I stood in the main store on a snowy December morning, watching Marcus demonstrate proper drill bit selection to a group of eager workshop participants. He'd traded his expensive suits for jeans and work boots, and his hands had calluses now from helping with deliveries and inventory. The transformation was remarkable, but what struck me most was how genuinely happy he seemed. "The key is matching the bit to both the material and the screw," he was explaining to Mrs. Chen, who was planning to build flower boxes for her shop. "Nick taught me that it's not just about making a hole, it's about making the right hole." I smiled at that. Over the past year, Marcus had become one of our best teachers, bringing his analytical mind to the practical problems our customers faced. He'd also implemented a digital inventory system that made tracking supplies across all 5 stores much more efficient, though he'd done it gradually, making sure everyone was comfortable with the changes. The business had grown, but not in the way Marcus had originally envisioned. Instead of rapid expansion, we'd deepened our roots in the community. The Saturday workshops had evolved into a full educational program, with evening classes on everything from basic plumbing to advanced woodworking. Local contractors now sent their apprentices to us for training, and we'd partnered with the high school to offer vocational education credits. "Miss Thompson?" A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find Jenny Martinez, Tom's newest hire, holding a clipboard and looking slightly overwhelmed. She was 19, fresh out of high school, and Tom was training her the same way he'd trained me, with patience and practical wisdom. "What's up, Jenny?" "There's a reporter here from the Columbus Dispatch. She says she's doing a story about family businesses surviving in the modern economy. She'd like to interview you." I glanced across the store to where a professional-looking woman with a notebook was examining our display of locally made tools. The past year had brought unexpected attention to what we were doing. Other small businesses had started adopting similar community-focused strategies, and business schools had begun studying our model as an alternative to traditional growth paradigms. "Send her back to the office," I said. "I'll be there in a few minutes." As Jenny headed off, I took a moment to survey the store. The morning rush was in full swing, contractors picking up supplies for the day's jobs, homeowners tackling weekend projects, elderly customers who came in as much for the conversation as for the merchandise. This was what Grandpa had built, what he'd seen when he looked at these stores. Not just retail spaces, but community hubs where neighbors help neighbors solve problems. Linda Pierce appeared at my elbow, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression she got when the monthly numbers were particularly good. "Thought you might need this before you talk to the reporter," she said, handing me the mug. "December's shaping up to be our best month ever." "Really?" "Really. The loyalty program is working even better than we projected, and the workshops are generating more sales than I expected. People who come to learn how to fix something often end up buying supplies for 3 other projects." Linda's eyes twinkled. "Your grandfather would be proud of what you've built here." "What we've built," I corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Tom, Marcus, and everyone else." "That's exactly what he would have said," Linda replied. The interview went well. The reporter, Sarah Kim, was genuinely interested in our story, asking thoughtful questions about how we'd managed to compete with big box stores and online retailers. She seemed particularly intrigued by the collaboration between Marcus and me. "It's unusual to see siblings work together so successfully after such a major inheritance dispute," she observed. "How did you manage to rebuild that relationship?" "We had to learn to see each other as people instead of obstacles," I said, glancing through the office window to where Marcus was now helping a customer choose the right paint for a bathroom renovation. "And we had to understand that there are different ways to honor a legacy. Marcus brings skills and perspectives that I don't have, and I bring things he doesn't have. Together, we're stronger than either of us would be alone." After the reporter left, I found Marcus in the break room updating the schedule for next month's workshops. He looked up as I entered, grinning. "How'd the interview go?" "Good, I think." She seemed impressed by what we've accomplished. "What we've accomplished," Marcus said, echoing my earlier words to Linda. "I still can't believe I almost threw all this away because I was too proud to admit I was wrong." "You weren't wrong about everything," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "The digital inventory system was brilliant, and your marketing ideas have really helped us reach new customers. You just needed to understand what we were marketing." "Community," Marcus said. "Relationships, trust, things you can't put in a quarterly report, but that matter more than profit margins." "Well, don't go too far in that direction," I said with a laugh. "Profit margins still matter. We can't help anyone if we go out of business." Marcus grinned. "Don't worry, big sister. I've learned to balance the books and the heart." That afternoon, Tom found me reorganizing the seasonal display, moving Christmas lights to make room for ice melt and snow shovels. "Got a minute?" he asked, his tone more serious than usual. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Tom looked around the store, his eyes taking in the bustling activity, the customers chatting with employees, the easy atmosphere that had developed over the past year. "I've been thinking about retirement," he said quietly. "I'm 62, my wife wants to travel, and we've got grandkids in Arizona we hardly ever see." My heart sank. Tom had been my anchor through this whole experience, the steady presence that made everything else possible. The thought of running the stores without him was terrifying. "When?" I managed to ask. "End of next year, probably. But I want to spend the time between now and then training someone to take over for me. Jenny's got potential, but she needs more experience. Marcus understands the business side, but he's still learning the hardware side." Tom paused, studying my face. "I was thinking maybe you'd want to consider promoting from within. Find someone who already understands what we're trying to do here." As we talked through the possibilities, I realized that Tom's eventual retirement wasn't a crisis. It was another opportunity to grow and evolve. We could promote Jenny to assistant manager, bring in another experienced hardware person, Maybe even create a formal apprenticeship program for young people who wanted to learn the trade. You know, Tom said as we finished our conversation, your grandfather used to worry about what would happen to this place when he was gone. He was afraid it would either stagnate or get turned into something unrecognizable. I think he'd be amazed to see how you've managed to keep the heart of it while still moving forward. That evening, I drove out to the cemetery again. It had become a monthly ritual for me, a way to clear my head and remember why I was doing all this. Grandpa's grave was covered with snow now, but I'd brought a small wreath made from pine boughs I'd cut from the tree in my backyard. "Hey, Grandpa," I said, brushing snow off his headstone. "Thought you'd want to know how things are going." I told him about the successful year, about Marcus joining the team, about Tom's retirement plans, and our ideas for the future. I told him about the customers who'd become friends, the employees who'd become family, the sense of purpose I'd found in carrying on what he'd started. "I finally understand what you meant in that letter," I said, "about the real inheritance being the chance to build something meaningful. It's not just about the stores or the money, it's about being part of something bigger than yourself." The wind picked up, sending snow swirling around the cemetery, and I pulled my coat tighter. As I walked back to my car, I felt a sense of peace I'd never experienced before. Not the peace of completion, but the peace of knowing I was exactly where I belonged. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Family dinner at Mom and Dad's Sunday. Can you make it? I'm bringing someone I'd like you all to meet." I smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't miss it. Looking forward to meeting her." "How do you know it's a her?" he replied immediately. "Because you've been humming while you work for the past month, and you only do that when you're happy about something other than profit margins." "Fair point. See you Sunday, sis." As I drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook, past the houses where our customers lived, past the businesses that had become our partners, I thought about how much had changed in the past year. I'd inherited more than just a business. I'd inherited a community, a responsibility, and a chance to prove that sometimes the best way forward is to remember where you came from. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new decisions to make. But tonight, I was content to know that whatever came next, I wouldn't face it alone. I had Marcus, Tom, Linda, and all the others who'd become part of this strange, wonderful family business that somehow kept growing stronger by staying true to its roots. In the rearview mirror, I could see the warm lights of Harold's Hardware glowing against the winter darkness, and I knew Grandpa would be proud of what we'd built together. Not just the business, but the relationships, the community, the legacy that would outlast all of us. The golden child had become the guardian, and the inheritance was complete.